Our next presentation is about safety and security. Please welcome on stage Mr. Michael Nishi, the General Manager of the Bank of America Chicago Marathon.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for this opportunity and creating this platform, and especially for Martha and Paco for inviting me here. And George, thank you for all the work that you've been doing from a sustainability angle. And I think we can have a conversation because there's a lot that we've been doing that I think you would find interesting to continue with this movement, not even from sustainability as it relates to reduce, reuse, recycle, but also everything that comes into play when you talk technology as well as education. And I have some of that intertwined in my presentation in terms of how that even includes what we're discussing here, what I'm going to talk about in terms of the safety and security aspects and all the things that we need to really focus on and talk about. But again, I also want to take this a moment here to thank everyone that's in this room, the members of AIMS, coming together at a conference or a congress like this, because it gives us the opportunity to share these common and best practices with one another. And I find that going to these conferences and listening to these presentations is a great opportunity to learn so much from each and every single one of you and give us that opportunity to network and then continue to share these practices and bring these back home to our cities, to our events, to the communities in which we serve. And included in those communities are other events that might not be able to come to an AIMS conference, but hopefully Paco will do our part to recruit new members. But that's what we want to do, is take as much of this information back. And like George had mentioned as well, there's certain things that aren't a perfect fit in every single order, but it's the small nuggets that you're able to pull out of these presentations, that you pull out of these conversations that can be applied, that can be implemented into our plans, into our discussions, into those stories, which then continue to get and improve what we do. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about, and there is so much that we can talk about, and I can spend days on it, in terms of safety, security, emergency planning, and preparedness. However, and I know that everyone does it, we're all aware of it, and it's one of the things that I just want to say at the very beginning. Just because we're the Chicago Marathon, second largest marathon in terms of finishers in the world, just because we're big doesn't mean we can't get better. We always need to get better, we always do improve, and we always make mistakes. And I'd be the first one to admit I make mistakes every day, but if you don't make a mistake, you don't get better. You can't learn from them. And I think many of you that know me, I'm always willing to admit my mistakes, share what that was, so we can all learn from that. And you don't have to take the same fall or trip over the same obstacle like I have. I want to make sure that I can share that with you. So just very top level, I'm going to go over some of those details so we can all share and learn from one another. And hopefully, if you haven't done some of the things that we're going to talk about, at least it's a conversation. At least it gives you the opportunity to draw that line in the sand and take that first step. And then we can, like I mentioned, you can continue to improve upon what we start to build. And as many of you guys know, we got the Chicago Marathon coming up. Oh, excuse me. And not to go and read everything, but many of you know we have it coming up on October 7th, just a mere 5 weeks away. So I did come over here and for a quick visit to be able to share with my industry partners and friends. But as you can see, last year was our largest finishing field ever in the history of our event. Last year in the marathon specifically, we finished over 44,300 finishers. And as you guys know, and many of you that have run the marathon, and it's all in city streets in downtown Chicago. We bring in about $282 million of economic impact to the city. We have about 1.5 million spectators on the course. We, through the marathon, in terms of charity, we do raise over I think we're at $19 million in charities that are, funds that have been raised for charities each and every year. And our goal and our mission is always try to increase that number. Maybe not the dollar amount, because that's difficult in terms of, depending on what's happening financially, what's happening in the economics. At least we want to help promote and get more runners raising funds for charity, running on behalf of a charity to help at least raise the awareness. And as you can imagine, our events have that impact, are important to our cities, are important to our communities, which is a great thing, but it's also, it creates a certain situation where we become a target, and that's the unfortunate side of things. But our job, each and every one of us at our events, is to make sure that our events become a hard target, right? There's the soft targets, and those are the ones that don't really do anything, and they're the ones that are the bad guys, and I'll quote unquote call them bad guys, are looking for, the soft target. So all the work, all the measures, everything that we put into place, all the planning is really to ensure that we can create a hard target so we can continue to make our event safe, not just the participants. We continue to say a lot about our participants. Of course, that is a high priority and a mission of ours, but we also have a responsibility to ourselves, our staff, to ensure that they get home safely. Once they show up to work, we want them to get back home. To the volunteers, this year we'll have over 12,000 volunteers that we'll have to recruit, that we'll have to train, that we want to also make sure that they get home to their families as well. Not even just from a safety and security standpoint do we have that responsibility to our staff and volunteers as well as the spectators along the course, but it's a learning opportunity. So when you talk sustainability, it gives us that ability to educate that group, not just to perform what we're asking them to do within our own event, but also they can take that learning back to their homes, as well as the communities in which they live, work, and impact in terms of what they do and those leaders in those communities and leadership that they have in their families. Excuse me. And now we'll go over in terms of safety and security. And there's certain things that we'll talk about, and these are some of the principles that you should just keep in mind when we do start to develop those safety and security plans. And I think I can speak for everyone here, especially those that have been in the event business for many years like I have. I had started full-time with Chicago back in 1989. And I can tell you, not too long ago, the hardest part of our job was the actual production of the event. Unfortunately, that has become the easiest part, and what was easier back then has become the hardest part. And that's been the focus on the safety, security of our event, the legal aspects of it, and the insurance. So a lot of what we had done, which was so much fun, has become kind of on the back burner, and the priority has become the focus on the safety, security. And don't get me wrong, that's my day-to-day job, and I do enjoy it because, again, for all the things that I just said, for all the purposes I just mentioned, that's my job to ensure that everyone can have a great experience, but also I'm accountable and responsible for those people to make it back home safely. So again, I think those are the reasons that we have safety and security in place. And then we're also talking about, the things, I'll just back up one second, in terms of scalability. And like I just mentioned, scalability is key. Just because I can talk a lot about certain things that we do from the Chicago Marathon perspective doesn't mean, again, you take those nuggets out from this discussion that you can apply and implement into your own event that you guys can't do. And again, there's so much that I've learned, and we haven't been able to grow this event to this level without the support of our community, for other people lifting me up, giving me their plans, giving me the support, and this is where I learn it from. The sharing of these conversations. A lot of this stuff that we do, it's not, like we like to say, new under the sun, but we do like to share, and there's always room to improve and then learn from one another. And so the scalability part, and one thing that the analogy that I do like to equate our event is like the Chicago Marathon can be like an aircraft carrier. It's big, it's imposable, It's massive, but it's very hard to move. It's not nimble like a battleship can be. A smaller event can implement so many things that we can't do as quick as a lot of other events can. So those other events, even the smaller events, I learn a lot more from, and are able to implement those practices into our event. So just keep that in mind. And everyone continues to say, "Oh, we don't have the resources, we don't have the budget as you guys do." But a lot of things that we do and continue to do, like George even said from sustainability, there are things that just don't cost money. It's the education, it's how you prepare others, how you train people that make a difference. And those are low-hanging fruit, as I like to say, and it doesn't cost money to do it. The other part, things that we'll talk about is pre-planning. You know, everyone needs to put the time into the plans, and that's the other part. It doesn't cost money. It might take time, but it's important thing to do and focus on. It's always that first step. As soon as you draw the line, it's like, oh, I don't have the time this year. I'll start next year. I don't have the time right now. I'll do it later. But you just got to start somewhere. It's never going to be perfect. And that's not what you're trying to achieve. It's like you at least got to start something, and there's always room to improve. And that's, same here. And I'll give you some examples of things that we do, things that we're definitely improving, mistakes that I've made, and things that we've learned from it. The other part is mitigates risk, as we all know. Keep that in the back of your mind as you develop these plans. It's the reason that we have these plans, it mitigates and lowers your risk and exposure to these issues that might come up. And again, we're not always talking about major incidences that could take place, the bang go type of scenarios. It's like simple things or things that might happen in your event, things from an operational aspect that weren't planned for, certain weather-related issues that weren't planned for. So those are the things that you want to keep in the back of your mind. You want to have plans for that so you can continue to operate your event. And I have another good example of this one as well. The other one is from a financial aspect. You can help hopefully reduce your insurance costs. I don't know how much that nowadays, every time you find a way to reduce one expense, there's a new insurance policy for another. First, it started off with just protecting property, then it went to liability, then it went to cancellation, and then it went to terrorism. And then there's another policy for terrorism when it comes to nuclear, biological, and chemical. So every time you think you make a savings in one area, you're investing in another. So just something else to keep in mind. But the reason that you can illustrate and talk about all the plans that you do have might help impact and reduce, and talk to your agent a way to reduce your insurance premiums. Key areas of safety security program, and this is where I'm going to keep it very simple, very high level. You look at your Emergency Operations Center, and this is probably not in the order, which I probably would have changed the order. The safety security plans themselves, as well as the timing and testing of the programs. The order in which I probably would have put this is do your planning first, then you do, your training and exercises, and then your EOC, your Event Operations Center, is actually how you implement or execute, and that's basically a team that helps you get that messaging across. And then when you take a look at your Emergency Operations Center, I'll dive a little bit deeper into each one of those, but you talk about the EOC, as I like to call it, a bunch of alphabet soup that you'll start to see as I like to use acronyms and initials. But that's the collection and the facility, and we all have it. And again, they're not talking anything new that you guys aren't aware of. It's a facility that gives us the ability to pull in our decision makers, our city partners and representatives, our medical support teams, and the most critical, and you'll see, and I'll give some examples, is where we have all of our communications. So we get more intelligence coming in, information coming in, giving us the ability to then get communication out. And so it's a central location where all that is coming into one space throughout the entire event. So the critical part there is, and you'll keep hearing me mention decision makers, the ones that have the authority within one location that's accessible and can make that decision, and an informed decision based on all the information that's flowing into that facility. The other part is the safety security plans, and I'm sure there's different terminology, different types of plans that you guys have to fill out or may be required by your local officials, governments, et cetera. We have ours is the Emergency Operations Plan, as we call it, the Crisis Communication, which you guys probably all have from your PR groups, as well as your Incident Action Plan. And that's more city-related things that we're required in the United States to provide our local law enforcement and officials. But there are differences in these plans, but they're all equally important for us to spend that time to fill out, to build, and to evolve. And then finally, the training and testing programs. And when I say testing, it's more the exercising. And we'll show you the differences between those exercises. And I'm going to give you some examples of ones that we're actually conducting tomorrow and continually, even long range. And I'll share that with you, where we want to be next year and by 2020. And probably many of you will benefit from what we're going to be doing in the future and want to share, because everything that we do in Chicago, we'd like to share with our community and industry partners. And that's what we're probably best known for, is like sharing those best practices. And you'll continue to see a lot more of those publications coming from us, a lot more of those case studies come away from or out of Chicago, and sharing with the larger community as a whole. And this gives you an idea. This is our event operations center. And in the marathon, we call it the forward command. And the forward command, and the one at the top is just a third of our forward command facility that we build for the marathon. So again, this is where the comparisons to Chicago might not come into, it'd be hard to be able to build a facility like that unless you're Boston with Chris over there. And I know they have a very similar forward command facility. And it has basically all the bells and whistles, all the electronics, all the monitors you can imagine, giving us the ability to bring in as much information as possible with all the city stakeholders, with all the event stakeholders, to be able to run the event from one location. Now, the other one is just a recent 10K event that we had that we help manage. And any time that we get involved in helping one of our industry partners or a friend produce their event, the number one thing we build is that EOC. That didn't have the city partners, that didn't have federal partners, but it did have all the decision makers. It still had as much information, whether that's timing tracking, whether it was GPS tracking, and most importantly, all the radio channels and dispatchers in one facility. So that's where we build our EOC, and it's critical to have that. I don't care how small your event is. I'm also on the board of Girls on the Run in Chicago. Each year we have 3 events in the summer. Each one of those events has about 1,500 participants. We have an EOC. The team and the build-out's smaller. Again, if you remember what I said at the beginning slide, it's more scalable, and you can scale these things based on the resource that you have, but again, collecting all those resources and putting them in one facility, so then you have access to that information to give you the ability to make that informed decision. So that kind of gives you an idea of, what's built in our EOC. Let me see, that's up there. Oh, sorry. The other one is, if you can see on the top one, we have all the monitors. So again, that's the other part of developing those relationships with your local law enforcement, federal partners. They pull in the ability for us to see any camera in the city of Chicago made available to us. So we're able to build a facility, and just like the Ringling Brothers, what they said, we'll build it, they'll come. Same thing. It didn't always start like this. Everyone wanted their own facility until we started to pull and create a facility and make more information available. Did more people want to come in? More people wanted to be part of that. So again, you got to start small. It is a process. It does take time in order for you to get to a facility like this, to get that support and get a lot more people and resources sitting around the table, as we like to say. It gives you just a little bit more information in terms of, the capabilities that we build into our forward command. The communications with staff in the field, and again, we have the dispatchers, and I'll get back to that in a second, to locate necessary resources, mitigate situations before they continue to escalate, And that's interesting, where I think the day has changed, or the times have changed, where I used to be out in the field. I used to be out the start line. I used to go to the finish. But as race directors, it's like we feel that we have to be out in the field, on the ground, and be part of that action. But actually, I spend my hours now just camped out in forward command. That is the only place that I can see everything happening in one place. When I'm at the start line, the only thing I can see is anything in front of me. The only thing I can hear is maybe one radio channel, or two if I have both ears covered. But in the forward command facility, I have dispatch teams and hubs that are reporting back to me exactly what's happening. I'm actually able to visualize that. I'm actually able to see medical situation from pace and stress, a lot more information than I could out in the field. As you know, being out in the field in that environment, you're very limited in terms of what you're able to hear, what you're able to see, and keep up with your plans. So for those race directors that still think you need to be out in the field, I think you would be better served and serving the event by being in a facility that you're pulling all this information into and able to then get information out, ask those questions quicker. The ability to do that, and it's a very simple thing and team to put together, is your dispatch team. Radio dispatch, where for an easy example, you might have 10 radio channels, start line, finish, medical, course, etc. And then in dispatch, you would have those people monitoring start line, finish, medical, course, etc., sitting around a table. So instead of asking your teams at the start or finish to then switch over radio channels, they just communicate. It's like Big Brother's listening. This is start line to dispatch. Go ahead, dispatch. Then they're able to ask the questions without them switching. And if I'm sitting over here and I see Fernando and he's covering operations, and I'm the person on dispatch start line, I get a response, and it's like, okay, let me look over to him. He'll figure it out without anyone switching channels. As you guys know, I've been guilty of it. I switched to channel, forgot to go back. Now I'm lost. We want people to stay on their respective channel. Quick, easy communication. It is so simple to build, and it's very efficient. So again, those are the things that we've learned over time and continue to build out. Very simple solutions, but again, you pull it all to one facility, make it available to the decision makers, and it's incredible what you're able to do, what you're able to hear, and the picture you're able to paint, because it's all coming back, and you're able to see what's happening in all these different areas. The other part that I did want to make mention is you're able to track down resources. So if you can imagine, when we create our databases, we have every single participant database in and available there, their emergency contacts there, all 12,000 volunteers, their emergency contacts there or accessible through there, every single event staff and contractor, we have 1,800 of them working that day. We also have our vendors and their staff, et cetera, in the database. So anytime that we would have to contact somebody, whether a vendor, contractor, event staff, participant, volunteer, we're able to find some information about them, especially if there was an emergency. Just as you can imagine in terms of event staff accountability in a fire drill, what's the number one thing that they ask you? Who was up there? You should be able to say, well, I had these 10 employees, here's their names, and then we should be able to track them down. That's called accountability, and that's my responsibility. Making sure that, again, I have my responsibility is to be accountable for everyone that shows up that race weekend. And now we'll go into a little bit of the plans. Now, the 3 different plans that we have that I mentioned earlier is the Emergency Operations Plan, the Crisis Communications Plan, and the Incident Action Plan. And so when we talk about the Emergency Action Plan, that's more in terms of what we as an event can create, we as an event can implement, that develops and can it designates decision makers specifically. So again, when you have that plan, it's laying out who's responsible to do something when that time is called. When they're called upon to act, and it may be a secondary role, it's very clearly defined and already mapped out. So there's no confusion. When something happens, everyone doesn't have time to figure out who's responsible to go get the AED, to go get the emergency response or ambulance staff to get inside the building. All this is already mapped out. I've already designated that Hugh's going to be the one that goes to the front door and he's going to go greet the paramedics. That's already been planned. So those are the things that we talk about in terms of our emergency operations plan, designating specific people that have authority as well that are in that EOC. So when I'm in the EOC, and this is another example of part of the plan, if something were to happen, I do have the ability to cancel the event right then and there. So I have all the information, but I am the key stakeholder that has the authority to make that decision. The same thing in terms of the police. You don't want someone there that can't make a decision and then has to go and try to find the person that can. Every single person, whether it's the FBI, DHS, CPD, CFD, OEMC from our event, is sitting at that table, and we can make that decision at that time, and no one has to go find them. So that's also part of our emergency operation plan, who from our side has that ability to make those decisions. The response plans, again, those are important for anything in our emergency operation plan includes what we do in a severe weather situation, lightning, evacuation and shelter plans, and I'll make mention of that as an example in a little bit. Extreme heat and cold, I think you guys are familiar in Chicago. I think we were the first major event of our size to have had to cancel midstream in 2007. High winds, and I have a good example of that, and here's a mistake we've made just last year, consequences we paid or paying, and that's where we're getting, and I'll tell you some of it, can't tell you all of it, but we're getting sued because of it. Medical emergencies, and I know Chris is going to talk and go deeper into medical planning. But to back up in terms of 2007, as you guys are aware of, due to high heat, humidity, and we did have plans, and the important part, we didn't test all the plans. As sometimes we take these plans and, oh yeah, we did all the work and it looks great, and we put it in a drawer, but we didn't educate, train, or test, right? And so that was clear in terms of what had happened in 2007, or part of the reason. We did have our event alert system. It's a great communication tool for us in terms of green, yellow, red, or black. A lot of it is based on all hazards, but in this case, it was about weather and reflecting. So it was a great tool to communicate. We did a great job. I knew what it was. Our staff knew what it was, but we didn't educate. We didn't train the staff, the volunteers, or communicate broadly to the participants to act or change their behavior if they saw something change. So we basically, if you probably saw and probably have learned, and since then, we've changed so much. In 1 year, we changed the way we did our aid stations, really reinforced how we communicated our EAS system, how we communicated, how we trained in the volunteers and event staff. We got a ton of pushback. Why are we doing this? How come? Why do we have to do this? I know what to do. That was an anomaly, right? And that's the excuse you hear. We kept hearing. And what happened in 2008? Almost the exact same temperature, almost the exact same humidity. The difference was we didn't cancel. The difference was we didn't transport as many people to the hospitals. The difference was we continued and finished the number of runners that we did. After the race, we did a survey to all the participants. We talked about and added, did you see and hear the EAS system? 85% said yes. They knew what that was, which is great. That's huge, out of 40,000 plus runners. 70% said, we asked the question, did it change your behavior? It did. So that's the big difference. The reason why that we didn't have to cancel, the reason why we didn't transport as many people, because it changed their behavior and how they ran that race that day. So again, those are the things that we've learned. That was the mistake we had made. We learned from it, but we definitely improved upon it. And it's something that we continue to do to this day. The other thing that I had mentioned, this is the mistake we made last year, and part of our emergency operations plan is it deals with the high wind. Our high wind plan, in terms of different wind ratings, I won't get too technical, but it's based on the Beaufort scale, and it gives like 20 different variables in terms of wind and wind conditions. We tied that against and meshed that with our EAS system, so it should trigger in terms of this wind equals that. But some of it we didn't get right, and a lot of it was the wind gusts. So some fencing and a tower, 2 different incidents that took place, fell over, hurt not our runners, but spectators. And so we are going through litigation because of that. And fortunately, because of all these different insurance policies, we're all covered. But just again, those plans, and we just didn't take the extra step that we didn't recognize some of those wind gusts in it. But we did have a plan, and part of our plan that if we hit 20 to 30 miles per hour in terms of sustained wind, we would remove, reduce branding, structures, et cetera. But the gusts is what threw us off. But as you can imagine, we learned from that, will not happen again, and built that part in our plan and further into our plan for this year's event. The last part that I'll have is just the designating communication. And again, that comes from forward command, our ability to send out messaging for all the constituents I mentioned, whether it's participants, volunteers, event staff, vendors, blah, 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 where through variable message systems that we can email, text, the entire field and population in one button, race is canceled, done. And then you're going to see a message go out to 70,000 plus people and informing what's going to happen, all the way down to subsets, participants versus volunteers, groups of our staff in the organization, or to one single person. So those are the things that we've been able to build. Those are the things that we've been able to tie all together and make available through one facility. So again, that's the reason why we build a facility, make it all accessible by that team, because they can answer all these questions from the field that are coming back to our group in the EOC. Crisis communication plans, and I think all of us are pretty versed at that. And again, some of the things that we might have a communication plan or strategy when it comes to the event, and what would happen if there was a protest, what would happen if there's a death, what would happen if and it's happening now, and I won't mention some of the things that we're facing, but another brand or a partner, and some issue comes up, you want their PR teams, their public information officers at the table working with us, and not just trying to figure it out on the fly, but have a very clear plan in terms of who is going to talk about a death, who is going to talk about an issue that's happening in the city, not even including our event, who's going to talk about various brands, your title sponsor, your official sponsors. So having that laid out, you have a very clear communication tool and a plan in the event that something were to come up, that you do have a plan and you know exactly what to do. And I think you've seen way too many times or often that if there was an incident, if there was a death, if people didn't plan properly where that interview took place, all of a sudden I'm standing in front of all your brand sponsors telling and delivering terrible news. Part of your plan is, where should it be? Who's the audience? What do I want to protect? Well, I want to protect my other sponsors, and I'm going to have that meeting in another location, away from an event, away from the branding, probably against a gold wall. But those are the things that you just want to have a plan for, and not try to think if something were to happen day of and on the fly. But again, those are things that I think you probably have thought about, that you have plans for. But again, the importance of thinking through and continuing to add to those plans and make them even more robust. Incident action plan, and that's where it's more US based, so I'm sure that there's other type of documents or forms that are required by events in your jurisdictions, by your local law enforcement or governing bodies, but that's something that from our standpoint, it provides, gives them a better idea in a consistent fashion from event to event, city to city, state to state, in terms of our event structure. As well as the communication platforms, the radio frequencies, and that's a big deal. And I don't know if you guys have run into a lot of issues in terms of broadcast transmissions and conflicts and networks going down, but there's a lot of frequencies that interfere, whether it's radio, whether it's TV, and there's so much interference nowadays as technology is everywhere, ubiquitous about us, that it starts to interfere against each other. And so part of that plan is you need to list all the different frequencies that all your vendors that we're using, so in the event that something were to happen, they can, one, shut those frequencies down, clear those channels, especially if there's a MCI, that mass casualty incident that takes place in a city. So those are part of, our incident action plan that we have to submit for all of our events. What we do for our safety and security measures and what our plans are, we submit those to the city as well. And I think one of the other parts, and it's interesting, and sometimes it's not specific to our event, but we can also, and Chris, I think you probably have done this, or in your case from Boston in 2014, how your medical facility became that triage, not just to the participants, but obviously to the spectators and whatnot. What type of assets does the event have? What type of resources do we have that if something were to happen in the city of Chicago, had nothing to do with our event, we know that we would be a great resource for them. We have medical facilities, 24 of them throughout the event, along the course. If something happened in the city, somewhere along our course, they need medical assistance, they need resources, they need water or something, we would be able to provide that, and they have that information. Our medical facilities at the finish, those are the same things. We would share that in a heartbeat to help them. So those are the things that are important, that it's not always just about our event, but what can the event do to serve the communities in which we affect in a positive manner as well when it's their time to reach out to us. So that gives you a sense of what those plans are and the difference between those. Training and testing, as I mentioned, it's great to have a plan. It might look pretty, but it's more important in terms of who are you training, and then how are you testing that. And so, it's when you do the training, you have to review these plans. You have to review them with those individuals or those groups that are being asked to implement or enact them, the response action necessary with the appropriate staff that you've gathered in training. The other part, and this is just as important, you do the training in advance, and sometimes you might need to put people in different positions, happens all the time, someone doesn't make it, you need to fill the gap, but you need to do those daily briefings. We do a daily briefing in the morning, at the end of each day with our core team, and as well as we get closer to the event within our forward command facilities. Every day we also create a situational awareness report that's automatic every single day. Then on Friday, Saturday, Sunday at frequencies of an hour, then event day, marathon day that gets released every 30 minutes. And you guys can include everything in the situation updates, but for us, it's about any medical transports, any issues, security, how many runners on the course, still at the start line, on the course, at the finish, et cetera. So, those are the things that we send out. So if you can imagine on race day, the more information you send out, questions you're answering, what's going to happen? You're not going to get questions and have thousands of people asking the same questions versus pushing information out that they're probably looking for. So we build that in so to help deflect a lot of those questions coming in, we're able to push information out and deal with that and be proactive about it. So that's part of what we do in terms of getting that information out there, making sure that we put information in their hands. The other thing that we do from a general daily briefing, is general personal safety, just making sure that, hey, here's my environment, please be aware, be careful, here's this or that, here's the emergency exit, there's the AED, the bathroom's over there. Other training that we do, and to the sustainability part, is the other training that we offer to the runners, participants, volunteers, whether it's see something, say something, so they're better aware of their surroundings. If they see that bag that's been sitting there, they're going to make someone aware of it. Hands-only CPR, that's been a big initiative. I'm not sure around the world, I'm sure, yes, it is. But in the US, that's something that we've been pushing and promoting heavily. In Chicago specifically, we send out that hands-only CPR video to every participant, every volunteer, all the event staff. So they would be, especially the runners on the course, first responders. They see someone go down, you just want them to start hands-only CPR right away. And when you're talking about that type of education, that's sustainable, because then you're able to take that back to your homes, back to your communities, back to maybe the communities in which they serve, and maybe that father from that home is a basketball coach at the high school, and then something happens there. Now he knows at least to activate and do hands-only CPR if someone went down. So again, just think about that. That's a great training opportunity. It does go into play then in terms of when you're dealing with the staff and from a training aspect, the education, they feel valued, that you're spending the time giving them the training to do their job. They feel supported and not left alone. And I think we've been in that situation. You get to do something and volunteer, and you have no idea what you're supposed to do, and you're walking in blind, and you feel helpless, and you don't feel like they need you. So what do? Probably never volunteer again. So in this day and age, it's been very difficult, and I think we're all guilty of it, or we're all suffering from it, is from recruiting volunteers. And even the harder part is once you recruit them, how do you retain them? So the more that we build that trust, the more that we build that accountability, feel supported, that we look out for their safety, we're giving them the training, the more that they're going to come back and want more, the more that they're going to want to work for an event that values their support, that invests into them as much as they're giving back to us. So keep that in mind, not just from safety security, it also has a residual impact in terms of your recruiting efforts and retention in the future, which is very hard these days to get that type of help and support. The other parts that we do from a training is evacuation routes, and again, that fire drill. It's so much easier if you just go through and show somebody. Because if you walk through Grant Park right now, our main facility for the start and finish area, it'd be easy to walk across the street. When you're there race day, it's next to nearly impossible. With fence after fence and barricade after barricade, the environment and landscape has completely changed. So if you don't do those walkthroughs, it becomes very hard. It might look good on a map, but everything on a map too looks different when you're out there and actually on the field, and it's three-dimensional. So again, those walkthroughs are vitally important and something that we do with all our teams leading up to the event. Shelter location, same thing, evacuate. Where do you evacuate to? You go into a shelter. So just some of the things that we talk about when it comes to training. Sorry. And testing. So testing, these are more, and how we do them, you do them as well. They're called exercises. How do we exercise that plan? There's basically two different types of exercises. There are discussion-based exercises, and then there are operational-based exercises. You're probably more familiar with discussion-based, which is a tabletop, makes sense. Sitting around a table, let's talk through this. Here's a scenario, how would you react? And so it's more of a discussion-based and kind of going through the motions, so it does help. And if you don't do it, it's important to do. You'll learn a lot from it, and you definitely enhance your plans because of it. Operations-based is more of a drill, there's 3 different types of operations-based exercises. One's a drill, one's more functional, and then there's the full-scale setup, and I'll give you an example, and things that we're actually doing tomorrow in Chicago. There we go. Sorry about that. So when you're talking about a drill as a comparison in terms of, did I give you guys enough info on the tabletop? Yeah, I think. When you talk about a drill, it's like you're conducting a small-scale operations test. It's like a function, like I just said. You're going to go walk the route to an evacuation shelter. So that's something that we're actually going to be doing at the start line of the marathon, the post-race party of the marathon, the expo. So that's something else that just keep in mind. We focus so much of our time and attention at the start or the actual marathon, start, finish, course. But we also have an expo that runs 2 days, 200 and some thousand people going through those doors. That's an event itself. So we have our own emergency operation plans, our own IAPs, our own exercises when it comes to that event. We treat the Grant Park as its own event site and facility with its own plans, the course with its own plans as well. So as you can see, that these are events within an event, and they all have their own plans. So keep that in mind. Even post-race party, once the start's clear, that event basically shuts down. You don't have to worry as much about it. The course, as soon as that last runner comes through, you would think the event's over. But we have like 50,000 people left in the post-race party that goes until 4 p.m. So that's still a living, breathing event with security, with threats, and medical response needs that should be part of your plan. You can never overlook that part. If there's any vulnerability for us and our major weakness, it's the post-race party. We are tired. We started our day at 2 a.m., some not even sleeping throughout the day. Now we ask them to be as alert as possible to conduct at a very high operating level up until 4 p.m. It's very difficult. But our plans allow, because we rotate people in, new people into our forward command, so you have fresh, alert thinkers that can react immediately if something were to come up. So back to the drill, it just gives us the ability to set up scalable scenarios. And tomorrow in Chicago, we're doing an aid station drill, a stop and hold. So in the event there was a situation where we had to stop the event, we had to stop the runners on the course, and we have 20 aid stations. We have equipment, we have plans that basically tells them what to do, how to stop them. And this is where it becomes vital that Fernando and Martha, the captain, co-captain of an aid station, all goes well, they know what to do, but as soon as something happens, as soon as we have to do a stop and hold, they have to know exactly what their secondary plan is. And basically, Martha will go to the front of the aid station, work with that team to bring the barricades across. Fernando would be going to check in with the medical team and the ham operators, receiving and sending all the communication, and then it just goes all the way down. So that's the exercise that we're doing this weekend, having all the equipment that is going to be available at the aid station set up, or not truly set up in terms of a full-on exercise or drill, but enough of the equipment that they know, here's the materials that you have, would you know what to do? So we're going to put all the captains, all the managers into roles, assign them, and then go through different scenarios and see how well they respond. So that's a drill. A functional exercise is more of the testing of the communication protocols. So in our dispatch teams and everyone else, whether it's medical, police, fire, and our dispatch teams, we go through a functional exercise or workshop, tabletop, and go through different scenarios using radio communications, see how well they plan and react. So that's more of a functional exercise. Then the full scale, as I just mentioned, that's where it's built out, simulated exactly. So this is where I mentioned at the very beginning that we're going to be doing a lot of testing, a lot of sharing, case studies, documenting, and something by 2020 that you're going to see from us. We're going to go to a full-scale aid station stop and hold, stop and shelter scenario, where we have, our aid stations are 2 blocks long. Each aid station has 250 to 300 volunteers, all different resources. We're going to build out, get the permits, close the streets, and then we're going to build a full-on aid station, build a small forward command, and then basically get runners to come through and then run through that site, and then from the communication and forward command, make the call, see how well they adapt communication-wise, and we're going to document the whole process, write it up. Good or bad, we're going to definitely share that with our industry so we can all learn from it and learn from it together. So that's something that it seems so far away, but it's fast approaching. This exercise or this drill started 2 years ago. So now we're on it, it's 2 years later. So we have this plan that's been stretched out over 6 years, 2 more years to go, and we'll be able to deliver something that I hope will benefit all of our events, big or small, and learn from it. So that's something that we're going to provide and something we want to give back to our industry and to our friends and partners that helped us along the way. And to be a good leader and a good steward of our event, and our responsibility is to definitely give back to everyone here and other partners throughout the running world. And then I think lastly, and I think you guys will get the handouts, and I think you did. And here's some just additional resources, and one resource in particular. Obviously, a great resource is AIMS and bringing us together for all the purposes we talked about. There's other great resources, associations that we belong to, we go to, Running USA, Road Race Management, NCS4. So that's the one that I did hand out. And I know they want to talk to AIMS, and knowing that your interest when it comes to safety security, this is a group formed from the University of Southern Mississippi after 9/11 that they brought this group together. And they basically put together or created the National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security. That's a mouthful, so we call it NCS4. And just recently, I think as of 4 or 5 years ago, they brought us together at our friends at the Houston Marathon and basically created the endurance platform or program. And so now we gather each year as a summit, come up with the best practices, and have created the guiding principles. here's some just a takeaway of just the several bullets. It doesn't include everything that we've been working on that is available. If you go online, it's available for free. You can download it, but it's like 130 pages, 5 or 7 different categories that we break down our emergency response, safety security plans, really through NCS4. So it just a little handout gives you a little bit to take away, to nibble on, but also gives you a resource to go contact them if you have any further questions. And I'm sure you'll hear a little bit more, or hopefully a lot more, from our friends at Ames and from all of us in the running industry or community. And then obviously, if you guys have any questions, needs, anything else from me, my contact information is there. I'm always available. I'm always able to share what we do, answer questions. And as you probably heard or seen, that's what I'm all about. I love to share those common and best practices. So again, the 3 things that hopefully you take away from today's presentations is that emergency planning, and I'll change the order here. Emergency planning, training and exercising, execution, and especially the Event Operations Center. On that note, so thank you everyone for your time and this opportunity. Thanks.